everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a LatinX writers podcast. I am your host, Ruben Mendive, and today we have a new guest here virtually. So I always like to start the interview by having my guests introduce themselves. So if you could give us your name and how you identify for the people at home.
Yeah, so my name is Verner Maldonado, and I always try to identify myself as this kind of quirky, over-analytical, logistical, yet the chillest guy at the party standing in the corner, Latinx individual.
That suits you very well, I think. Where are you from? So when people ask you where you're from, what's the long version? What's the short version?
Yeah, the short version I always give everybody is, I'm from LA, and the elongated version, which it's funny you ask both versions because I think we probably get asked that question a lot, and I never know how to answer that. But the long answer is that, I'm a Guatemalan. My parents are both from Guatemala, and they immigrated here, and they originally lived together in New York, and then they moved to California, and that's where they had me. And, that's usually what I try to tell people is, I'm Guatemalan, but I'm not from Guatemala. That doesn't change the fact that I'm any less Guatemalan.
Yeah. And so what is your parents' story? What's parents, grandparents, what's their story? What brought them over here?
Yeah. So it's crazy because both my parents are Guatemalan, but they never knew each other in Guatemala. So they both just met in New York at a job. So my dad came here when he was, I think he was 22, and he just took a flight, hopped over. And this was back in the day where you could go to the Social Security office and they literally handed you a card, and that was it. And he started off working as a busboy, and then he worked his way up to being a manager type at a Marriott. And then he worked his way into airline catering. And then my mom, she met him while he was working at Marriott, and slowly they were friends first before they decided to enter into a relationship at some point. And then they both just decided they wanted to kind of get away from New York. And then they were in California, and they were both equally married before they met. So when they finally decided once they finished those marriages and they got together, my dad really decided he wanted to have another kid. And my mom was like, okay. And so they had me. So, technically I am my parents' only child, but I still have half brothers and sisters on both sides of them.
So what was your childhood like? What part of LA did you grow up in? Can you sort of describe your household?
For the earliest part of my life, there was me, my brother, and my sister. And at one point, all 5 kids were living under one house. So it was really tight. But that was just for a short period of time. And we grew up in Cerritos, near Norwalk, Southeast LA, 20 minutes from Anaheim or something. Essentially, for me, when I was growing up here, I wasn't doing too good in school. I wasn't hanging around the wrong kids, but I wasn't hanging around the smart kids either. I think my parents at some point, they realized California was getting too expensive for them, and we were renting. And then we actually decided to move to Florida. So half my life I grew up here in California, and then my development years, I grew up in Florida. And over there is where I kind of really became this skater kid. I was a skater boy back then, and I had my hair just as long as I do now. I just wore cargo pants and skater t-shirts, but I did better in school, and I felt like it was okay to reach for a higher education. It was actually looked nicely upon. It was oh, you're trying to get a better education, you're doing good in school, and those things felt good. So I think that's where it started early on, where I decided to really not feel bad about trying to do a good job, because I think a lot of times when you're growing up, you grow up with that silly attitude of school's dumb. It was okay. I kind of figured out no, it's okay. You can get good grades. You can still be who you are, and you can go do what you want. And the people who make fun of you for wanting to care about your grades, those people don't need to really matter in your life.
Yeah. So what part of Florida did you all move to? What was it like there?
We moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which is 20 minutes north of Miami. And it's actually probably to me, the Fort Lauderdale area, that's the definition of what South Florida is in general. It's the most kind of democratic known area of Florida, and it's a lot more quiet. It's not as loud and heavy as Miami usually is, but you can still have fun in Fort Lauderdale. And plus the beaches are literally everywhere. The biggest thing I noticed when I moved there was how beautiful the beach was, and how warm the water and how clean the water is compared to California. Anytime I would talk to somebody and they wanted to come to the beach here who was visiting, I'd be like, you don't want to get in the water. It's gross and it's cold, and but I love the Florida beaches. They were nice.
I always like to get a sense of people in high school. So like the teenage years, like 14 to 18. Well, the way I always frame it, who were you at that time? Who were you pretending to be? And how did other people see you?
Yeah, I was like I said, I was the skater kid. So I was always like skateboarding and I was trying to like break into parking lots or different spaces behind churches where there were stairs and stuff so you can like jump them. But for the most part, I was definitely like a nerd, but I was trying to be like the funny, cool kid in class, and when I was growing up, I was short and then like I hit that growth spurt and all of a sudden I was tall. And then it was like, you're a lanky looking dude. And then I also played water polo at the end of my high school years. So it was like, I kind of first started off as that kid who didn't really know anybody, who just stuck to his two friends. And then as like you grow up and you kind of entered a little bit of sports, I kind of just got to know everybody. And that whole idea of like the jocks and like the emo kids and like the band kids, like that all just kind of disappeared. It was like, we're all just friends here, and like everyone just has something different that they're into. And I think that mingling, I think, was kind of the beginning foundation of me figuring out like how to mingle in general and other places, because it's actually important, and I didn't really realize that until college, because if you just stick by yourself, it's like you're not engaging with anybody, you're not learning anything about anybody, you don't know how to empathize, I think, if you don't kind of try to do that more often. Yeah, back in high school, I was just a kid, have fun all the time, play video games, but like not let my grades slip, and my parents were very strict. They're very like, you go to school, you come home, you do your work. And if you go out with your friends, it's only for an hour, and it was just like a constant pain because I felt like you're doing so well, but your parents aren't giving you like that extra oomph to go along with it. That was probably me and my parents have a great relationship. It was just one of those things where I think in a Hispanic household, sometimes it's like they just want you to never have too much fun, because if you have a taste of it, then you're gonna like just disregard your responsibilities for some reason or something, and one time I had it out with them, and I was like, I got into a yelling competition with them, and I was like, I should be able to like hang out for an extra hour with my friends, and and they eventually listened, and they finally got it. They're like, okay, we get it. You're doing a good job, and we should reward that a little more than we're not.
I'm always curious about like people in the sense of their like Latinx identity.
Yeah.
And like, and I think especially it's hard during those like adolescent, like high school years where you're still trying to figure out who you are. And then you have this like added like identity. Like, so can you sort of like describe that journey for you of just like, do people like ask like,
Yeah.
where are you from? What are you like,
Yeah. I would actually love to talk about that, because that's something that I've been trying to better look back on and understand in the past few years. I think back in high school, I don't even think, for the most part, sometimes I saw myself as like a truly like Latinx type individual. I kind of like almost wrongfully like went along with the crowd of people that were always saying like, oh, you're just so super whitewashed, and like, you're not really Spanish. You're like, you grew up here and you didn't really hang out. Like, you don't know the thing. And I actually, it's messed up, because it's like, I let that be like my identity. I would always actually, and I would add on to it. I would say like, oh yeah, like I am whitewashed, and blah, 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 blah. And for a while, I didn't realize the things that the people were saying around me or to me was simply because I was just in the room existing like as a brown person. And like, that was the biggest mind blow I had in the last few years, which was like, wow, all these things that people said sometimes, whether it was a joke or not, they just said them because I was in the room, because they thought like, oh, he's okay, he's cool, like he won't get offended. It wasn't until I started attending a lot of NALEPs, the National Association of Latino Independent Producers events, and I actually found them while I was in college, and I saw how they like treated each other, how they took everybody under one umbrella. And to me, that's what the Latinx really thing is for me. It's all of us under one umbrella, and it's more unifying than it is like dividing, and I found a home in that definition, I think, because I'm no longer afraid to say like, I'm a Guatemalan. Like I might not speak as perfectly or as well versed in Spanish, but like I can still speak it and I can still understand it. It was hard. It wasn't hard back then, but it's hard looking back at it now, because it's like I was doing a disservice to myself. And the only thing you can do about that now is understand it and own up to it, and then move on from it appropriately, making sure that I tell other people if I see somebody making some type of joke, I'm not afraid anymore to be like, yeah, that's a little weird. Like I wouldn't make that joke just so you know, my friend, like, not in
Yeah.
any kind of mean way, just like, hey, you shouldn't say that.
And you mentioned your growth spurt. And listen, you're the tallest Latino I think I've ever met. I
It's weird. It's weird. Like my parents are short people. I get it from my mom because if you look at old pictures of my mom, she was like a tall young woman, and my dad is like was a super short, like chubby type man, which is actually a cliche I've been told. Like in Guatemalans, like they're usually known for being like short and stocky, So, and my parents are both very light skinned, so I find it even weirder that like I came out much darker than they are, and so I don't know where that comes from. And it's I can see that there's even differences with us because if they walk into a room, they don't get too called out unless like they start speaking or something, and then you notice they have an accent. But for me, it's like you walk in the room, especially with like my beard now. I just walk in the room and it's like, yeah, you're something else. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. I mean, it's like I think people can't spot me, and my name especially helps with that too. Like everyone knows. I don't think anyone else. Every time I meet somebody, they're like, I don't know anybody who's named Verner, and I'm like, that's a good thing now. So,
yeah, and I am always curious about people's names. So like
yeah.
when people see your name, like when you introduce yourself, when they see it like on a project, like what reactions are you sort of getting?
It's the same one that you're giving me right now, which is like Werner. Like that's such an interesting name. Like where does that come from? Why? That's a German, and people actually usually know like it's a German name. And I tell them like, yeah, that's right. And they go, oh, are you German? And I said, well, technically, I think I am, but like way down the line. It's like maybe I don't know, 2 to 10% German. I never did one of those like genealogy things, but I'm sure if I did, it would be a little bit. And I'll tell people, I was like, well, my name comes from my dad because he always wanted to give his boys like strong, male names, whatever that means. And it's like my brothers is like, Ivan named after Ivan the Terrible, and my brother's name Alex after Alexander the Great. And Werner, I think one of his uncles was named Werner with a W. And in Germany, you pronounce W's with a V. And he just liked that. He was like, Werner, like, yeah, like that sounds like a name right there, and that's why he gave it. He just wanted me to have a strong name that I think he realized no one really ever heard of, and you could identify, and it didn't sound too weird where it was like, oh, it wasn't really culturally identifying, I think is what he liked about it either. He was just like, he'll walk in a room and nobody will know what he's about, and his personality is what will carry him, which is, I think, the goal of what my parents always wanted, is they wanted whatever I brought to the table to carry me, not just my ancestry or my backstory,
So what did you do after high school? Like, did you have a plan? Did things go according to plan? Like sort of what were you trying to do?
Things definitely did not go to plan. I mean, I was the kid. It's funny because I had appreciated education, and I had loved like doing good and getting good grades and trying to get a good GPA. But at some point, I was over it, and I didn't want to do school anymore. And my original plan was like to not go to college. It was just to get a job at Publix, which if you've ever been to Florida, or anybody who's been to Florida knows, it's just like a grocery store. It's like the Albertsons of Florida. And I was like, I just wanted to get a job, and I just wanted to start making money. That was like my highest goal. And I had a conversation with my brother Lester, who is one of the other like creative artists in our family. He's an abstract painter, and he was like, he had to talk to me. He's like, no, you can't. You got to go to college. Like you'll experience something you've never experienced before, and like you'll find things up about yourself. And it's like, and you have the opportunity. You have a scholarship. You have all these things, and which I did. And he's like, I want you to talk to another friend. And I talked to one of his friends, and he was also like, yeah, you don't want to do that. You want to go to school. Like it'll be something you experience and enjoy. And so they convinced me really to like go to school, and I did. And once I did, I was still in that mindset of like, I just want to get a good job with good money, because you just want to do well. So I was going to be a lawyer, I was a criminal justice major. And I didn't think of anything else, not even filmmaking at that time. I loved movies. I always had a passion for movies. I loved going to the movies. My brother and my dad always took me to the movies. My dad would always like see one movie and he'd be like, let's just sneak into the other one, while we were in there. And so we would. So I loved I loved understanding movies, but I didn't really take it seriously until my senior year in college, where YouTube was doing a video contest with HP computers, and it sounded so simple. And I just had a great idea that I thought, man, no one else is going to have this idea because it's so simple. And I was like, I'll film it. And I put like effort, but I wouldn't call it like A+ effort. I just did the job, and I ended up becoming a semifinalist. And I ended up winning this huge artist laptop kit of stuff to like make future things with. And I was so shocked. I was like, wow, if this was only 20% of my efforts and I actually really like this stuff, if I actually put 100% of myself into this, I'm like, it's just math. It's like, there's no way I could not have some sort of success and or livelihood within this industry. So then I added film as my major. I stayed an extra year, and then I graduated. And then I started trying to make more short films. I tried to get my first job, and that led to me working on my first movie ever, which was Rock of Ages with like Tom Cruise and Catherine Zeta-Jones and all these A-listers. And I was a production assistant. And then it just snowballed from there. I just got the next job and the next job and the next job and kept going.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about like that transition between changing your major to then getting that first like PA job. Like, can you sort of talk us through that journey?
So I switched my major and I was like, okay, here we go. I needed to take X amount of classes. And I started thinking like, okay, I got to make a film. So I made about 2 or 3 short films. And then I met a friend of mine. His name is Matthew Schlitzel. And he was a writer. He wanted to be a writer. And we both worked on somebody else's feature film. And like, it was not the greatest thing in the world. They thought they were being really cool and creative by shooting their whole movie on MacBook laptops. They made a special like Steadicam for it and everything. And it was like, it's going to be the first feature film on laptops. It's going to be huge, you know? And it was the most difficult thing in the world because you have no monitors. The camera's facing, you don't know what you're aiming at. It was just a mess. But we decided like, let's just help make this thing and learn everything we can. And through that, we ended up having to drive back and forth and carpool a lot together. And we figured out the things we liked about movies. We figured out the things we didn't like about movies. And we just had a connection of like, oh, we both like the same things. And was like, we should work on something together. And so he wrote a short. And I was like, this is great. Let's make it. We made it. And it won like best screenwriting at school and was like nominated for best directing. And we realized we had something special between us because it was like, once you find that partnership, it's like, you never want to let it go, right? He's like, whatever he writes, I want to give him notes on whatever he fixes, he wants me to shoot it. It became that back and forth thing. And then we graduated and then it was like, I need a job. And I got really lucky. And I was also really like go after it type attitude. And I went to every type of networking event you could think of that was ever posted online, right? Anything that was a meetup, like I went to it. If there was like some type of filmmaking forum, like I went to it. Like I said, I'm the guy who's usually the chillest dude in the room and like I just stand on the corner, but I had to like talk to these people and I got to know them and I found out there was a movie in town that was filming and thankfully they gave me a number, right? And I reached out to that number and they're like, okay, send us your resume. I sent it, never heard anything back and I still kept trying and I heard they were looking for extras. So I was like, okay, here's what I'll do. I'll show up to this extra thing and like maybe I'll find somebody from the movie that I can just ask like if I can be like a volunteer or like get a job or something, you know. And I almost didn't go. I remember sitting in my car because it was an 80s movie, right? So you had to dress 80s. So I'm wearing whatever the fuck I have, which is like nothing, and it looks stupid. And I'm sitting in my car and I'm like, this is dumb. Like I don't want to, it's such a waste. I shouldn't go. I shouldn't do this. Like it's just wasting my time. I'm dumb. And then I was like, I just had that moment where I'm like, no, I should just show up. If I just show up and nothing happens, then I'll let it go. So I got in my car and I drove there and I asked and I was like, hey, is there somebody from production that I could talk to? And it was like, yeah, talk to that guy. And I was like, okay. And I was like, hey man, I just wanted to say hello. Like, you know, just in case you're ever looking for somebody like free work, like I'll do it. You know, like I'm free. I'm not working. I can do whatever you want. I can drive. I can do whatever. Okay. So we exchanged information. And then I emailed this person. He was the key set PA. That's what his job was on that movie. And so I emailed him once a week saying the same thing. I was like, hey, Mr. So-and-so, like, just let you know, like, I'm still here. If you need an extra body this week or next week, I'm free. And I did that for about a month, just emailing this guy every week, you know, when you think that's probably super annoying. But the truth is anybody who's working in production, they have so many things going on. If they just see an email, it's like they read it and they just go through it. And like, that's that. They're not getting upset about it or they're not like, this guy is annoying. So then he finally called me and he said, hey, do you want to work for this one day on Friday or whatever it was? And I was like, oh, absolutely. I would love that. So I went and showed up not knowing anything. I was so nervous. I was just like, it's like, and then I went to the makeup trailer and was like, hey, ask them if they want something to eat. And I was like, okay. And I was like, do you guys want something to eat? And I was like, oh, can I take like an omelet, whatever the fuck it was, like some special thing. It was like, okay, go make that. I was like, go make it. Oh, there's a caterer. Okay. So I went to the caterer, got a thing, and I was so nervous about making sure that I did this one task right. And the makeup artist was like, oh, thank you so much. Like, oh, this is so good. And I was like, okay, great. And then for the rest of the day, they just put me on a corner to watch a door that like to make sure nobody walks in and out during the shot, right? But the thing is, I stayed there all day without doing anything. And I didn't even know like you could break for lunch or something. And I remember they broke for lunch and I was looking at everybody eating and I just asked them, I'm like, is it okay that I can eat food? Can I grab food? Because you don't know. And
Yeah.
and they're like, of course you can eat. This is lunch. It's all free. Like you can eat whatever you want. It's free catering food. Like just eat it. And then I did. And then I once I finished, I showed up and I said, hey, I'm all done. Do you need anything else from me? And they're like, and he looked at me, and goes, oh my God, I completely forgot about you. Where were you? You were in that one room? I was like, yeah. He's like, oh my. And then he looks around, he goes, this is why this guy is great. This guy just did his job and didn't do anything else. You're coming back. We're going to bring you back for next week or whatever. And so they brought me back. And here's the even funnier part, which is like, I just cared so much about working. I wasn't thinking about pay or anything. And then the next week they hand me a check and I was like, what's this? And like, it's your check. And I was like, my check? I don't even remember filling out paperwork, but they're like, here's your check. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, yeah, your check, you get paid. I was like, oh, I'm getting paid for this. I was like, this is amazing. Like, wow. And it was like $500. And at that time you're like, whoa, $500 in one check. Like, wow, that's amazing. You know? So because I did a good job for that person and that group of people, it's like you're now in it, right? Because whatever they have going on next, they're going to want the people that they like already really like and just are comfortable with. So the next movie that came into town was Step Up 4, you know, the dancing movie series. And I went and did that and it was all in Miami. And then it was just like the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, thankfully. And then it became like a team. It was like me and 3 other people that were just like constantly working together on the next big things that were coming through Florida, you know, which was a cool feeling because it's like you're the go-to person now for all these hotshot projects. That's like Michael Bay's Pain and Gain came through that town. Iron Man 3 came through that town. And I worked on all those and, you know, so it was really, it was fun. But it was just a funny transition because I was like, I thought I was hustling. And then I guess I was to the point where I didn't even realize I was getting paid for it, you know? So
What I'm always like impressed by is people that sort of like hit the ground running. So like, what's the thing that motivated you to like go to these networking events, like email this guy every week? Like, what was that? How do you make that like transition from like a guy who's like too nervous to do some of this shit, and then really starting to put yourself out there?
It sounds bad, and I try not to do this anymore. But like the fear of failure and like the fear of not being able to accomplish something was so big in my life. And I thought I can't be a failure. And it just pissed me off to think that I could fail at something. And I was scared too. Like I didn't want to come home and be like, oh, I didn't accomplish this thing. Like my parents worked so hard. My mom is like still cleaning houses to this day. And it's just like, you don't want to ever walk in with that thing of like, oh, I didn't do the thing that I said I was going to do. So I could not let myself fail. And it's like, like I said, when I sat in that car that one day where I was debating whether or not to even just show up to something, I just thought, man, if I don't do this, like I'm already failing. And then I got to tell my parents that I didn't go do it. And I couldn't do it. And what definitely helped with me being able to just talk to people randomly was college, that college experience. Like I was also in student government. I was like the chair of a committee, and having to engage with your entire university over everyday issues and like different funding and all these activities for the school and concerns and safety concerns. It was a big eye opener to understand everybody's concerns. And not only that, but like find a middle ground for everybody to be happy. You couldn't do any of that without engaging with them. You know, you couldn't do that without going to the events, going to the different clubs meetings, going to understand what they want or why. So that all definitely helped me like be unafraid of like asking a question or saying like, hey, how do you do this? Or, hey, can I do that job? Or why can't I do that job? What do I need to do that job? And then just understanding patience, you know, because I think over time you learn that things just take forever in any capacity, in any avenue, whatever you're doing, they just take time. So if you don't have that built, if you know you're doing everything on top of that, you really can't, all you can do is just wait, you know? And I think waiting is like, for me, I've developed this thing where it's like, all right, if I already did everything I could, I can just chill and watch my movies now. Like, I can just sit back and watch my stuff. I can read, I can do things. And it's like, I can't do anything else until somebody calls me or I decide to call them and follow up, So yeah, a lot of that came from college and a lot of it came from just a fear of not succeeding. I mean, it's got to be really big. Like when people say it, sometimes they say it, but I don't think they really mean it. Cause it's like, it's like life or death to me. You know what I mean? It's just, there's just no other way to describe it. Like I cannot see myself not succeeding. Otherwise, if I do, it's to me, that's the end of the world. It's like I have to go get a grocery job or something like that, not to minimize those positions, but like, you know.
And so like, what did your parents sort of think of this like path you were on? Because you sort of like went into college being like, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer. And then you're spat out as a filmmaker.
Well, they weren't excited about it, that's for sure. They were obviously happy that I was going to do like law school and be a lawyer. My dad always had this thing. He's like, he's going to be the president. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Every parent says that weird thing. When I told them I was going to do filmmaking, it was like, they just do that look where it's like they hear it and they just do this look away where they're like, like, okay. And I was like, okay. I mean, when you're going to tell your parents or somebody important that you're changing your life or that you're doing, you have to be ready to have answers, So whenever I told them that I was going to do something, it was like, here's what I'm doing, but wait, here's how I'm going to do it. Like, but wait, here's the 10 steps that's going to take to get there. But wait, I'm also still working. So I have a job. I have a weekend job. Like, it's not like I'm not working. They were thankfully supportive. They were just like, look, if you love this, if you're going to do everything you can to make it happen, then we support you. Just don't let it not make you money. Make sure you're secure in yourself. Make sure you can like pay for things and more importantly, be safe. Because they figured out when I was starting to work those jobs that like they're long days. They were like 12 to 19-hour days. It was exhausting. And they were just very adamant about me being careful, and I still pushed myself too much, I think, and they got scared because one time I slept at the wheel and I almost had like thankfully it was so late that no cars were around. And I fell asleep at the wheel and I hit a medium and I just swerved, and never again after that I would ever put myself through like working too many hours. If I was too tired, I would tell them like, hey, I can't work anymore, or I need a hotel. Like it's the work hours and productions are so grueling sometimes. And in a weird way, with everything going on right now, it's actually the work hours are finally at a reasonable position because everyone wants to stay safe and everybody has to get their proper sleep so they're more immune and all that stuff. So back to what you were saying is like they weren't happy at first, but because I laid it out for them in the way that you always should for anybody, they were okay. And they were like, all right, we're going to sit back and watch and, just include us. That's all they ever cared about was like, just make sure I included them in what I was doing, because they want to be a part of it. That's the long and short of it is if you're doing something, your parents just want to be involved. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people don't realize that it's really just that simple. They just want to know what's going on.
Tell us where you went to school and like how you describe it as a film school.
Oh yeah. So I went to Florida Atlantic University and it was in Boca Raton, Florida. And they had a film program. I always say it's not fair to call it a film school because I feel like it's one of the more departments that is pushed off to the side. But it was a film program nonetheless. The only thing is I didn't really learn too much of the production side of things of like cameras or even like proper storytelling or like writing basics, things like it was more like very theory based, understanding like auteurism and other old filmmaking techniques and stuff like that, or understanding the movies that came before like Citizen Kane and Bicycle Thief and like 400 Blows, which I appreciated because it definitely introduced me to a lot. Like, and that's where I first saw Y Tu Mamá También, like with Alfonso Cuarón. That was really one of the first films in school that opened me up to like relationships between people and like understanding, just any relationship or any kind of love relationship with anybody and how it's like not complicated, but it can be, but it's okay. Like, it's not a big deal. People just like each other. And like, that's that, and sometimes things happen. And, it was just a great like movie to introduce me in college at such a developing age, I think, especially when you're understanding everybody's problems and concerns and like where they're coming from, or what they're afraid to share about themselves. Like, because Florida is still a very conservative state. And even though I was in college, which is usually where you'll find a lot of diversity or a lot of open-minded people, it's still not. It's still a very like heavy white school. I still walked around feeling like I'm one of the few Latino people around, but I still found a community within that. I still found a Hispanic organization that I could join and like see like-minded people. But it definitely opened my eyes a lot to what else was going on outside. And like I said, the film program wasn't the greatest, but it still obviously taught me something, and I still took something away from it. So in that respect, it was good. I would have obviously loved to have gone to one of the big film schools, but it was just so expensive. Couldn't afford it. Simple as that. Yeah.
And so, you sort of described that you were sort of doing like productions in Florida and sort of like, what was the next thing, because you're sort of doing that in Florida. So like, and I'm sure you wanted to be like, okay,
oh yeah,
what do I build from this? So what did you build from that?
So what I built from there was, after the first few jobs, I started to realize, like, okay, how do I get to what I want to do, which was direct. I always knew this. Like, once I really started taking filmmaking seriously, it was like, I just want to direct. Writing and directing, sure, if I could, obviously, but like I thought I was always better at working in a director-writer relationship where I could work with the writer and we could identify with each other like what we both want. So to chase after that, I decided to really tell people that, like, I think the next best thing, and I was just figuring this out on my own. I didn't really ask, but I was like, I think the next best thing would be to be an assistant to a director. I mean, to me, it was like, it's like math, like 2 + 2, I was like, okay, so if I do that, I should learn more about what this really takes. And maybe that will somehow get me closer to being a director, because there is no pathway to being a director. It's like, you just do it or whatever. So I started to tell people, I was like, hey, I would love to be an assistant. Just putting it out there, that's what I want to do. If you hear any jobs, that's what I want to do. And then we worked on a show called Magic City. It was like a stars show. And there was an assistant director who was from California who was working on it here or in Florida. And we got to know each other really well. I did a good job for them. And they were like, hey, I got a pilot that's happening in California. Like, would you want to come do it? And I was like, I mean, I could pay for my flight, but I just don't know where I would stay. And they're like, oh, you can stay with me. It's totally fine. Like, we can carpool. It'd be great. I was like, okay. So I took that job because I was like, a job in California? Like, yes, because I was trying to come back. That was my other goal. Like, I just wanted to come back to California. And we did the show, or the pilot, and I got to know the director of that pilot really well. And I told him I wanted to direct. I told him I wanted to be an assistant. And one day at the wrap party, he probably had too many drinks when he said it, but I took him up on it. He's like, Verner, if this show gets picked up, like, you can definitely be my assistant. And I was like, yes. And then I read the show got picked up like a couple months later. And I, not even kidding, within 30 seconds of reading that Deadline article, I emailed him right away. I was like, hey, remember that one time when you said, like, I could be your assistant? I'm like, I didn't say it obnoxiously. I was like, I would still love to do that, please, if that's a possibility. And it took a little shuffling, but he made it work. He really was like about keeping his word, because a producer called me and she was like, we don't know if we'll make that work. We only have a certain amount of people we can hire. And I told him that they said that, and he was like, no. He's like, listen, this guy's going to be my assistant. We said that was going to happen. Like, we're going to make it happen. And I was like, wow. And so because I got that job, I moved here finally. I moved back to California in like 2013, summer of 2013. Yeah, I moved back to California. I stayed with somebody. I couch surfed a lot, and I did the job, and I was an assistant. And I finally got to see a really good firsthand look of how to do things in the TV world, at least. And it's a lot. TV works really fast. It's like I was in every meeting for every script, which means when you get a script, you got to go through it with 6, 7 departments, right? Because they all got to know what's going on. And when I say go through it, I mean like page by page. It's like you go talk to hair and makeup, you talk through every page of the script and every change, and then you meet with the prop department, and you go through you go through the script like 6 times for every episode. When you have 13 episodes, it's like, you go crazy. But I got to see really how to do it. And I thought, wow, this is the greatest experience of my life. Like, because now I know how to treat my projects. I thought, like, okay, here's a level of work that I should really be applying to my stuff. And I took that opportunity because I was working and I was an assistant and I was like making these contacts. I was like, I got to make another short, like a really good quality short. And I worked with the same writer, Matthew Schlitzel, who I had met in college, who was also in California for his master's in screenwriting. And we wrote another script. And I did an Indiegogo like fundraising type thing for it. And we raised $10,000. I really took advantage of working on that show because I was like, hey, I'm raising money for my short film. Do you want to donate? And everyone, of course, was like, oh, of course, like $100 here, $300 there. I was like, perfect. And then I shot that short, and I did it by the book. I was much more of the mind of like not just shooting it guerrilla style for the sake of like getting what you need. I was like, no, I want to be able to tell people that I can do it all by the book, you know? So I was like paying for permits, paying for locations, paying for actors, paying for fire and safety, because you're working with all these licenses. The fireman's got to come approve it, renting gear, insurance. Like I did it all by the book, and it was good and it was helpful because I was like, great, I know what this looks like. And now whenever anybody was gonna ask me, I was like, yeah, I know about permits. I know how to do all that. So we did it, we shot it, and it went on to win like best film in Seattle. And I got to show it around where I was working, and people took me seriously. But unfortunately, the show got canceled. So like the job ended just like that. And I was right back to PAing. But just to go back into that transition, it wasn't like I just was a PA and I gave up. It was like, oh, I PA'd again, and I still let people know I wanted to be an assistant. Now, the great thing was where I went to PA next was a show called The Last Ship, which was like a Michael Bay TNT drama, like Navy action show. And again, I just put the work in. And season 1, I was a regular PA. Season 2, I was a key set PA. And season 3, guess what? They're hiring a new director. And everybody knows I was an assistant and that I wanted to be an assistant again. So they called me first. And I sat down with the guy and I was like, hey, here's what I can do. Here's blah, blah, blah. He's like, okay, great. Cool. And he didn't say anything. And I was just like, okay, so like, you know, if I don't get the job, that's fine. But thank you for the meeting. He's like, what? It's like, no, you got the job. You're hired. I was like, oh, okay, cool. You know everybody. So why wouldn't I hire you? I was like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. And I was like, sweet, I'm in the assistant chair again, but this time on a show that I've already been around. And I kept pushing, and you just keep pushing. I think you don't know your limits until you just get there. So I would always ask as a joke, when I was working, I would say, hey, and if you need anybody to shoot inserts, which I don't know if everybody doesn't know, inserts are just those shots. Like if somebody grabs a cup of coffee and it's like a shot of just the hand in the coffee, that's an insert. And we had plenty of those. And I was like, you know, if somebody wants to shoot those, like I could shoot them. And unfortunately, during season 3, they had somebody to do it all. And I was like, you know, whatever. But I still came back for season 4 and 5. It was a stroke of luck, honestly, because they were shooting inserts. They had them set up. My boss was going to shoot them this time. And you know what? He calls in sick. And he just goes, I can't come in. There's no way. But you know what? You should do them. I want you to do the inserts. And I was like, no way. You know, so I go to everybody. I go to line producer. I'm like, hey, just so you know, like boss man isn't coming in, but he wants me to shoot the inserts. I'm like, it's coming from him. He says I should do it. And, you know, his rank is higher than everybody else's. So it's like, I was like in a weird position where I'm like, are they going to try to tell me that I can't do it? And they were like, okay, yeah, you can do it. You can do it. And I was like, great. So I shot these inserts, and you know how it is. You do it once, you do a good job. And if everyone's happy, then you're going to do it again. So I did it right that first time. I shot the inserts. It was crazy. I learned a lot. And then they were like, hey, we have more inserts. So we'll just have Verner shoot them, right? And it was like, yeah, for sure. And then I just became an insert director, if you want to say that. You know, it sounds funny, but I was the insert director for the last 2 seasons of the show. And I had my own meetings. I had my own conversations with each department about what we needed. I had my own call sheet with my name on it. Like, it was the coolest feeling in the world. I felt like that was definitely one of those major steps that I took for myself, because I just kept pushing for them to let me do something, you know? And the show got canceled after that 5th season, but I think if we were on for one more season, I would have definitely gotten that chance, I think, to direct an episode. You know, it just didn't work out that way, which is fine. But I think looking back on how I pushed for each time or for each different thing, it definitely helped. And like I said, I don't think you know your limits until you just ask, you know? If you just ask, the worst anybody can say is no. It's such a funny, like, common thing we all say, but it is so true. And like every time I hear it now, I'm like, yeah, obviously, because I know firsthand too. Like, you just don't know unless you ask.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm always curious about people's like first 2 years moving to LA, just because I think it's a great learning tool for anyone who's thinking about doing it. What were those first 2 years like? And like, what like lessons did you learn? For anybody who's thinking about it, it's like, this is probably what you should know.
Yeah, I think you definitely should never come here without some sort of plan, which I've listened to the podcast before, and I've heard other people say it, but it's also to the extent of like, in my mind, you always got to think worst case scenario when you're planning for something, you know? So it's like, if you're planning on moving out here, what does that mean? Are you telling yourself you want to move out here for a year or two and see how it works out? Or are you telling yourself like you want to live there permanently? You know, because those can be two different things. I had a job to come to, you know, so I felt secure. I didn't have a car or anything, but I had a job, and I was like, okay, I've got a full-time job I'm coming to. And also, you got to just be ready to tell yourself, like, you can't depend on having a film job, right? I was already telling myself, like, if that job didn't work out or something like that, I'm 1000% ready to go work at McDonald's or go work at the mall or do something to just make sure I'm making money. Because the hard part too was like I had to buy a car, and I had never bought a car yet. And I was buying a car in California of all places. Thankfully worked my way into not having like a co-signer, but it was like, those are things that I didn't even get ready for. So it was like, do you really know what you're coming in with, you know, and where are you going to live? Because it's expensive. And the way I got around that, like, I'm not afraid of like going through the mud. Like for my first month, I was staying in an apartment of my brother's friend because he was out of state or something like that. So I stayed there. Then when he came back, I stayed with my friend, Matt, the guy from LMU, my screenwriting partner. He was living in Culver City, around that area. And I was sleeping on the floor of his apartment, like on a mat, you know. That was for like 7 months, and he got tired of it. Not to like be blunt about it, but he was just like, you need to move out. So I was like, okay. So I went to my next best friend who was from California, and I asked if I could stay with him and his family. And that was an even smaller living space than my friend's studio apartment. Okay. Because it was a house of like 5 or 6 people. And where I was sleeping was in my best friend's room next to his bed on the floor. And I had a twin mattress that I would sleep on. But the way it worked in the room is, this is how small it is. There was his bed. And then if I put my twin mattress down on the ground, you could not walk in the room anymore. That was all the space that was available in that room. So every morning I'd have to wake up and just put my little twin mattress on the wall. And that's how I lived for probably like 3 or 4 years, was in that tiny room on the floor. And honestly, it was fine. Like, it wasn't like I was crying every night about how shitty I was living. It was like, I was excited. I had like a second family that I lived with, and it was my best friend, and we got along so well that like it was nice to come home to each other and like talk about our days and stuff. And it was fine, you know. It was like I was saving so much money, because what that family was charging me for rent, because we were like family, was nowhere near what I would have been paying if I was paying regular 2015 like LA rent, which was like in the $1,000 range at the time, I think, you know. So I was saving a lot of money. And because I was saving a lot of money, it allowed me to like take care of the car, take care of certain debts. Like, you know, it allowed me to walk around LA without being afraid of ever like being in a place that I might need to move or something, you know? So I think the important thing is like, you got to be willing, to me, if you really want to live through it, like you got to be willing to go through the mud. You got to understand you're going to live like shit maybe for a while. I mean, you just got to make peace with it. I know that's hard to do, but it's like, you just got to know that going in, because once you know that, there's nothing to be afraid of, you know. There's nothing to scare you about anything. If you just know that that's what you're walking into and that you're okay with it, then all right, you know. I mean, obviously you should if you don't have anything lined up coming here, you should save up some money, not just for like rent, but for, like I said, if you're planning on being out here for 2 years or permanently, you should save up money that like you're going to be okay for a year or two, you know, which can be a lot, but you should come get any job if you need to.
Another way that you sort of got on my radar, because we have a mutual friend, but like one way that you got on my radar was through this short that you did called Swim. And it's a really good short. It's on YouTube. I definitely recommend people check it out. But what I immediately noticed was that you had someone from The Last Ship in the cast. That's what I'm curious about, because it's like,
okay.
Because I see that, I'm just like, oh, this person like has balls. Like, they're not afraid to ask. So like, can you tell us about making the short and sort of how that all came about?
Yeah. So again, I think this was a common thing that I've been saying, but like, I found myself in a position at The Last Ship where I had all these contacts, and I had a lot of respect already. And I knew that the show is coming to an end. And I thought, man, I can't let this show end. And besides the inserts of it all, like I can't not have something to show for it that is mine, that can really, when we walk away from this show and go our separate ways, that everyone will remember me by. And I told my friend Matt, same writer, same best friend from college, you know, I was like, we needed to work on something. And when I was done with work or on off days, I would bring him to the studio, and we would use the writer's room or like a conference room at work, and we would work on a story. We would treat it like our own writer's room, and we would go, okay, let's figure this out. What do we want to work in? What kind of world? very basic stuff. We're just like, what do we want to do? What's interesting? And we started talking about swimming. And I saw this like old Michael Phelps Under Armour commercial that was like so dramatic and like just cool. And I was like, wow. And it had like a powerful message. And I just thought, I was like, oh, that's cool. We should do something with swimming. And I used to swim too. I was like, what about swimming? Like swimming's cool. People like the when they watch the Olympics, they watch swimming. I'm like, maybe we should do something with that, like a tough, maybe like a whiplash type thing. And we're like, oh, that's great. Like, let's write it. And so he wrote it and we went over it. And I was like, this is great. We should ask somebody from the show to be in it, to play the coach. And we thought about a couple different people, and I thought about who I knew more, so because I worked on the show for so long, I did get to know the cast and I got to like be friends with them. And I think because I never really like pushed anything on them for like the past 4 or 5 years, I was just like, hey, what's going on? Like, how's your weekend? Like, we're just friends, And then when I finally had the script, I just said, hey, like, I know this is awkward, but I have this short that I was thinking about doing, and I think you'd be great for it. I was just curious if you wanted to read it and let me know what you think. I'm not asking you, like, obviously, no pressure if you don't want to do it. I just would want to hear what you think if you want to do it. And he was like, yeah, give it to me. And that was Charles Parnell in The Last Ship. And he took it and he read it that same day. He was like, yo, I love this. I want to do it. He didn't even ask me like, can I do it? He just said, I want to do it. And I just thought, holy crap. Like, yeah, dude, are you kidding me? Of course. And he was so nice. He was one of the nice people I ever worked with. And so nice to the fact that when we had auditions for the kid in the short, he would show up and like read with every person we brought in, like chemistry reads and stuff. And he would be part of those conversations about like who he connected with more. He was great. So then it was just figuring out how to make it, right? Because it's like, it's swimming and it's like drowning and it's like a lot of stunt work. And I decided, okay, how are we going to do this? So the producer's assistant on that show expressed his interest. And I was like, why don't you produce it? That's what you kind of want to do. Like, let's fucking do this. You want to do this? Let's do it. Like, bring it in, let's produce it. So he came on board and he made my life so much easier. It's amazing what a good producer can do for you. Cause it's like, he really made a point of making me feel like all I needed to care about was how I tell this story and how I work with the actors and what I need to get done. Everything technical or paperwork, he took care of all that stuff. And we decided this time to not raise the money or ask for money because we had already done that before. And our thinking was like, if we're ever going to do that again, we want it to be for like our biggest thing, So with this one, and plus we were all working, so we were making good money. And we decided to split the bill between the three of us. We went and found our DP, who was a movie operator who works a lot for Matthew Labata. I always forget how to pronounce the DP's name. Matthew Labata, who's Darren Aronofsky's DP. And he works a lot for him. So for me, it's like that dude's being mentored by one of the greatest cinematographers of our generation. And we're friends and he wants to do my short. Perfect. I feel like all the stars are aligning. We find a location. We do location scouting. The biggest hurdle was the pool. Figuring out what pool we're going to use because every pool is a community pool that's run by the city, and to have them shut down is like so expensive. But we figured out a loophole is that like the pool, I think twice a year, they clean it. And when they clean it, they have to drain it. And when they drain it, they close. So we talked to them a lot and they said, look, if you shoot in this window of time, it'll be right when we fill the pools back up, but like 2 days before we open it back up to the public. So we made it work where we could shoot everything we needed in those pools for 2 days within 10-hour days. And there was a lot of stunts involved with the film. So I used the same stunt coordinator from The Last Ship. I said, hey, we have a swim sequence. What can we do? And it was legitimate. It was like a stunt coordinator on a feature film. He was like, all right, well, we can do this. We can do that. Blah, blah, blah. And so he walked us through it. And then we went to his house. We did like a stunt rehearsal in his pool with the cast. And we figured it all out with the DP. It was I couldn't believe how well we did this. It was like a legitimate movie. Like we did stunt rehearsal, we did camera tests. And it was like, once we had everything laid out, I could not feel more confident like walking into the shooting day. And we had like a scuba safety diver who was down there, like when the kids are being drowned, if something weren't feeling good, like he would come in with the oxygen, like right away. It was all so safe. And that was the biggest part for me because I felt like if I could do this here, I could do this on a bigger scale. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, how many films really do that with like stunt coordinators and like safety officers and like all these things in play? I feel like not many people do that because they just want to shoot it and get it done guerrilla style and do it for cheap, whatever, which is fine, But I always wanted to make sure I did things legitimately because I think that was the only way people could take me seriously. So we shot it and Charles was great, from The Last Ship. And he was just so well to work with. And there was a couple times where we had different discussions about what we wanted for the scene, but like that was a good learning experience too, because that was the first time I had to sit there with an actor and like debate about what he wanted versus what I wanted, and finding the middle ground, or giving up and just letting him do what he wanted, or am I going to fight for what the film is itself? And I fought. We had a long like half-hour discussion while we were filming one day. Not the best idea, but it was my first time really engaging with an actor in such a intimate way that at the time I was like, I could not let something go, and he couldn't let it go either. So we came at a standstill, and until we agreed on something, and then we shot the scene, and then it worked. But I was very thankful for that, because it taught me a lot about how you communicate with your actors. And I think that's important for any filmmaker to know. So we shot it, we edited it, we color corrected it. I felt like such a pro, because I went to a professional color studio where I sat down with the colorist, and he's like, how do you like these reds? And I was like, it's a little too red. Can we lower it down? I felt like such a weird pro. I was like, yeah, that's perfect. And then we just let it out into the world. And thankfully, it got a good reception from a couple film festivals. But the greatest thing that it did for me was bring some recognition from the Ryan Murphy mentee program, because those guys really liked the short and they really liked me. And I think with all my experience on top of that, they just thought that I was like a right fit for their program. And within that program is how the short really just like launched out into the world. It really helped put it all over the map. It helped me get a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions, a lot of company meetings, and now I have my feature that I'm working on. And then the combination of working with Nalit, they're like another strong arm for me, because with my accomplishments, they're also like, hey, look at this guy with all his accomplishments. Like, here's another person everybody should be looking at. Now there's the LatinX directors database, which I got in on, which I couldn't believe either, because it's like, I still think of myself as not accomplished enough. Even though I know I've done a lot, I still think there's more to do. So to see people like standing up for me without even knowing me so much so far is like a really powerful, and it's something that I really appreciate about this community and like what you do for Lista, because it's like, we're the ones that are still putting each other on the map and not anybody else, which is crazy, so.
Yeah. And I think that's why I wanted to talk to you, because I feel like you are someone that's very primed for these sort of like programs with Nalip and the Ryan Murphy mentee, because for them, they're really looking for people that are like just ready to take the next step. And I think you do well in that, because you have the industry experience, you have the hustle, and you have work to show for it. You're like, look, like, and that's like kind of the magic ingredient to like start getting into these programs and really be like advocated for. So can you sort of talk about like the Ryan Murphy like mentee program? Like, what is it? Like, what did it entail? Like, what do you feel like you got out of it?
So the Ryan Murphy program, they called me and they're like, hey, we want to schedule for an interview. We really like what you have and we'd like to know more. And I was like, oh my God, I freaked out. And so I went to the interview. We talked. They talked about who I worked for and my experience. And they were like, and they had explained to me their concerns too, because what they had realized in their program is that a lot of the people that they were bringing in didn't have a lot of set experience. They may have had accomplishments, but they didn't have that like workforce experience. So they didn't know how to act on set. They didn't know how to communicate with people in meetings. And they've kind of found that like it wasn't meshing well sometimes, how to talk in a room, right? When to be quiet, when to say something. And I was like, absolutely, of course. They're like, okay, we think you'd be a great fit. We love your work. And, we'll let you know. I was like, great. Then 3 months later, it was like, you're in. You're one of like 30 people who are in. And I was like, I called my mom first. And I was like, Mom, I just got this huge thing. I'm calling you first because like you got to know this is really important. I have no idea what it can do for me, but it's nothing but good, And she was excited for me. And what they tell you is you need to wait because we're going to find a director to pair you up with. I was excited and nervous because now it's like, who am I going to mesh well with? And they try to figure that out too on their part. They're like, who is he going to mesh up well with his experience and their experience? And how are they going to like elevate each other maybe? And ultimately, I was paired with a director named Millicent Shelton, who's like the executive producer director on a new show now called P Valley. So she's doing that. And we worked together on a show called 911. And that's where I did my shadowing, which is what it's called. And basically, it is a shadowing program where it's like you attach yourself to a director and then you become a part of their schedule for the next 3 or 4 weeks. So you're there for their prep, for their shooting, and for their post-production editing and stuff. And again, very thankful because I've already been a part of that process. I know exactly what prep is like. I know what shooting is like. I know what I've been in all that stuff anyway. So when I met her and we started talking, she's like, you already know everything. Like, what can I choose more? Like, what can I teach you? How can I help you? And I thought that was so helpful because I was like, well, how do I engage myself in rooms, in like generals? And how do I talk in what they also do? The program is they set you up in meetings with like Fox and FX and 20th Century. They give you a couple meetings so that studios can get to know you. And I was like, how do I conduct myself? I've never had a general. Like, how do I do that? She really walked me through a lot of that. Like, she reminds you that like meetings like those are first dates. You just want to be chill and be cool and cordial. I was like, great. And it was actually really cool because on 911, the episode that I happened to shadow on was like a really like a half season ender type episode. So it was a big one. And 911 is always big, but this one was like particularly bigger because they had to film in Big Bear. So I just like luckily enough also got to go travel with the show. So we got to go to Big Bear. We stayed in a nice cabin. I got to meet the cast a little more too. We all had dinner one night. Like I got to meet a lot of people because we got to go travel and we had to do all these extra things. So I think I felt like I had a bigger experience out of most fellows out of the program because I just had a little extra time. But through it, I learned how Ryan's world works. I know what the things are that they care about. I know the things that they want to push through first and foremost. And I thought that was super helpful because if I ever find myself working in his world, which is obviously a big world right now, I know what he wants, and I know how to deliver it. And I think with my experience, I'm more ready than most people have probably been, It was just really good because now that I can say I was part of the Ryan Murphy world, it's like another thing people take seriously. Like, oh, so you really know what you're talking about now. And like, oh, you're really doing this and that. And it's just using those accomplishments and like pushing them forward on everybody else, So I was very thankful for it. It worked out well. And it, like I said, it lasted about 3 or 4 weeks, but then the aftermath effect of it is like priceless and like lifelong lasting because it still comes out to this day about me. And like, it's still something I get to use to push about me. And,
I am curious about your storytelling because that's sort of like another reason I wanted to have you on because I know a couple of filmmakers, directors who have who maybe don't call themselves writers per se, but they still have like a relationship with writing and sometimes with a writer. So can you sort of talk about like, where did that writing come in for you? How has it like progressed to like how you like to do your storytelling?
So for me, yeah, I'm definitely one of those people who would never call themselves a writer. And I think it wasn't until like the past 3 years that I stopped saying that. And I was like, you know what? Like I am a writer. Like I do like to write. The real issue was that I was just so, what's the word? Like so self-defeating in myself about it. I just didn't like myself enough to really say that I'm a writer. But at a certain point you have to tell yourself like, no, you are a writer. And then once you start saying that more and more, it's like, okay, now it's like, I know I'm a writer. I have to write. So I feel like my storytelling for my own personal writing is much more about finding dramatic moments in life that people don't often talk about or observe. Because I think even in those moments, you can tell an interesting story. So, and I'm struggling with that right now with a couple different projects. But I think like, a simple example is like kid goes and buys popcorn and then like he goes home. My thinking is like, well, what was that moment between having the popcorn and then right before getting home? It's like, was it like enjoyable that he had that popcorn or did he like drop the popcorn? Like those are those funny, like in between moments that I really like to try to study and observe and try to like tell a dramatic story out of it for me, because I just think I want to see more of those stories. I want to see those stories that people don't really talk about. I want to see once the credits have rolled, I want to know that story. I want to know what the real issue was. And like I said, it was only something within the last 2 or 3 years that I really started to tell myself that I'm a writer and that I've started to write more often than not, and I still need to do more of, to be honest. Like, and I think you and every other writer knows it's like, you can procrastinate so easily to the point where it's like detrimental but you got to like keep telling yourself, you got to stick to a plan and you got to just sit there and write it because, and I've been doing this for the past quarantine, thankfully, which is like, I've been writing a short, I've been working on a pilot treatment and even just doing the short for me, like my biggest goal in writing is to just finish a short because it's like the simplest thing. It's one scene, and it's like, and I think for me, it's easier to tell myself, like, if I can write one scene, I can write 2. If I can write 2, I can write 4 and so on and so forth. So, and even just writing this one script that's like 6 pages, I've gone through like 10 times. And I just had like an epiphany the other day where I thought, oh, you know what? This isn't the story. The story is actually right before this. So I have to overhaul the whole thing again, which is like, it's absurd, but I understand that it sucks. In my mind, I'm like, God, I don't want to rewrite the whole thing, blah, blah, I don't want to do any of that work. But the truth is like, that's where the story lives. And me understanding that and me going to go do that is like, I think that is the work of the writer, And when I finally realized that, it's like, oh yeah, that's what writing is. Writing is like finding the story, figuring out what's not the story, and then rewriting it again. And then like doing it over and over again until you can't anymore, or you just know it can't go any further, or until you've shown it to people that you care about and they tell you whether it's good or not or something. So yeah, it's kind of a middle ground when you do that too, I think. When you show it to people and you share it, it's like, yeah, take their notes, but take it with salt, obviously. Like, there's what they want and then there's what I want. And if it's ultimately what I want, then it's good,
And, I think you did a really good job with that with your short swim, because it is it's about this guy who's trying out for the swim team. Mm-hmm. And you're right. It's like a small dramatic moment that I'm sure like everyone who's been on a swim team knows that moment, but like, do we generally think about that when we see the swim team going? And so like, what are some of the other themes that you find in your writing and your storytelling that you feel like are constantly coming up for you?
I think what always comes up is like determination, indecisiveness, and a sense of loss, how to deal with loss, and that comes from a personal place for me because, I lost my dad almost 3 years ago now. And even before he had passed, it was something you knew was coming for a long time because he was just sick in and out. And I think dealing with this like constant anxiety of like every phone call you get, it's something not good, and every like text you get is like something's going on. And then when it finally happens, it's like, it's heartbreaking and it's sad, but it's also like somewhat of a relief for me and my mom, because like now my mom is not constantly going to the hospital, is not constantly like figuring out his medicine, is not constantly like keeping up with his like 1,000 appointments, and we're not in constant anxiety about something going wrong, it's just that it's past. And I think a lot of those themes always come up, especially in swim. I think that came up because you see the kid drown, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't watched it yet, but like you see the kid drown and it's like, you don't know what happened. And at the end, you reveal that the kid is there, but he obviously emotionally is like fucked up. And the kid who drowned him is like having a moment where he's like, I don't know if I did the right thing. I don't know if that was correct, but then the coach says something simple like, hey, if you don't eat, like, you're going to suck at practice or something like that. And the kid's like, right, practice, winning. That's what this is about. And he takes a huge bite, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to win. And it's that weird moment of like understanding, I did this horrible thing happened, but like his determination is to just be the best. And it's like, didn't even matter that he almost killed that kid. He just wanted to win, and I think dealing with those moments in any aspect of life, I think is something we all kind of go through. I try to really push that home a lot because I just don't think people own up to it enough. And I always want people to face what they don't want to face. It's kind of a weird thing, but like, I'm always a fan of like, you don't know what you're dealing with, like, but I will shove it in your face so you see it because you need to. If you don't, like, you're not going to move on. And I want to see people move on. I want to see people like move forward. I want to see people like succeed and get past their issues. Not that it's going to be easy for them, but I want to see them succeed. I want to see them win, Yeah, it's a little weird, but
it's growth,
Yeah, it's growth. It's a weird, sick growth, but yeah.
I am curious about like your relationship with like Nalip, just because they are like a big like entity with like a lot of like Latinx filmmakers, creators. Sort of like, how did you get into that world, and sort of like what have you found in it?
Yeah, so Nalip, so funny enough, like I said, I actually first originally discovered Nalip when I was in college, back when I was like 22 or 23, because out of curiosity, I was looking for what organizations were out there that are like Latin based, and they were the only one that popped up. And I became a member and I kept up with their news and stuff like that. But then I just lost track over time because I started working and I was just so focused on like making money and like making networks and contacts and working on cool movies and stuff. I just forgot. And then they reached out to me after I'd finished the Ryan Murphy thing, and they had found my short. I was so shocked because I just got a call. It was like, hey, I'm so-and-so I'm JR from Nalip, and we saw your short from Swim. We thought it was great, and we want to screen it at the Academy. We're about to kick off our 20th anniversary, and we think your film is really important, and we want to show it at the Academy. And I was like, at the Academy? Like, what are you talking about? And I just was so humbled by it. I just thought, what can I do for you guys? Like, of course you can screen it, but like, what else can I do, And more importantly, like, how did you find me? And they just kind of gave me like a wink and a nod, or like, oh, we're keeping track of people. Like, we've been watching you. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, I would never have guessed that, and that's what really helped start our stronger relationship from that point, because once that happened, I showed up, I did like a Q&A thing. And not only that, I talked with Ben, and that's where I met Raymond, who I know has been on the pod. And I just started building all these other friendships because we were all just so happy to see like success in each other. It's so weird. Like, we were just so happy, generally excited to see each other, not knowing each other, but knowing we probably have the similar struggle and same upbringings maybe. And we're just so happy to see each other succeed. To see a guy like Raymond, who is like young as fuck, and to hear that he's like a writer on Selena, which I know we all can't wait for it. Yeah. It's mind blowing. It's mind blowing to see a kid his age, like, have such success. And you only know he's going to go up from there because he's such an activist. He's such a up. Also, like, he wants to see everyone else succeed with him. Like, there's no way that kid's not going to succeed. But anyways, I met everybody there. I met Ben, and I heard Ben give a great speech about like Latinx. And I think it's usually the same one he always gives, but it's like how we're all under one umbrella. And when he really talks to you, he's so motivating, and he's so like, he makes you feel excited and like, you want to help everyone else. And that really drove me to be more involved too, because I just realized, I'm not doing enough. There's more I could be doing. Obviously, there's limits to what everybody can do. There's no judgments when somebody can't or can't. I felt like a personal obligation to do more. So when they had their media summits, I try to volunteer, no like big headedness about it. I don't come in as if like, hey, I was that guy that screened my film in Alip. I just try to come in and be like, they need volunteers. So I'm going to go work for free, and I'm going to help set up tables and pass out wristband, whatever it is, because you just want to give it back, especially when they're being such a huge advocate for you. I don't think I need to be one of their guest speakers, but I can definitely be somebody who can help them accomplish what they want. I can help spread their message. I can do this and that. Because of that, I've met so many other people. And anytime they do anything, I try to be a part of it. I try to just say hello, and I try to make sure I can. And now I am getting emails and calls from people in our community. Like, I just had a call yesterday with this 19-year-old, 20-year-old kid who is a Guatemalan. He just graduated from Boston, and he shot me an email just saying like, hey, I saw your film. Like, can I poke your head about it? And I was so excited because I was like, yes, like, I want to do this, because when I was growing up and when I had all these questions, there was nobody I could ask. And I always told myself, I'm like, man, if anybody ever wants to ask me like how I did this, I want to be able to tell them. And I want to be able to tell them what to expect, what they should do. I just want to, and I told them when we were done talking yesterday, I was like, look, you can call me for whatever you want. Like, if you have a resume, what do you want to do? I was like, what do you want? Like, what can I do for you? And he wants to be a production designer. And I was like, great. I know people in art departments and different shows. The easiest thing I could do that doesn't cost me nothing, I could just send your resume. Does that promise you anything? No. But like, it's something else you didn't have before, right? Like, I could do that for you. No cost, nothing. And that's really like what I find the leap does to you. I think it makes you realize how much more empowered you are than you think you are. And they bring you together to say, like, let's do this as a team. Like, let's bring each other up, because nobody else is doing it for us. You obviously recognize that because you do this podcast. You realize that like there's a ton of us. And how many episodes do you have now?
Like 70.
Like, yeah, I was going to say you're probably creeping up close to 100, but like,
yeah.
And they're all important. They're all going places. Everyone's being recognized for them. And like, you're being recognized for it because you're an advocate for us too. And let's not forget, you're a writer too. I'm trying to keep you on tabs for your writing, but that's what Leap does. I think it brings us together, and I think it helps keeps us accountable to ourselves. And I love that. And I always am thankful for Ben and all those guys for finding me, because I felt like it did a lot, and I just want to pay it forward 1,000%. So
I like to ask my guests who are the like writers, storytellers that they admire.
Yeah.
So this could be heroes of yours, peers, friends, people you creep on Instagram who don't know who you are, but you're like keeping tabs on them. So
yeah, definitely. One that is a peer who I still haven't been able to read his writing personally, but like I knew him as an assistant when we were working on a show, and he's now like on the Hulu LatinX list. His name is Nico, and he's a smart kid. And every time I see him pop up, I'm like, that's awesome, dude. Like, that kid was right there with me in the shit. Like, and now he's doing it big. He's like getting there. But like personally, I always loved people like Alfonso Cuarón and Guillermo and like Robert Rodriguez. Robert Rodriguez more so than the other two, because I think Robert was one of those first ones that really like just took off running. And Judd Apatow was always one for me too, because for him, he was always one of the people that was more transparent about how he does everything and how he came from where he came from and how he writes and what that process looks like. And I was fortunate enough to see him work on set. So I've seen him direct people and I've seen how he like improvs things and just the different layers. Because if you go through any of his DVDs or Blu-rays, he has such an extensive like special special features section of stuff. And it's really like a good film school to me, you know, and that's where I learned a lot too. So I've grown to really like Marvin Lemus and Linda from Hentified. You know, Hentified, I think, is one of the shows that's come closest to like representing what growing up looks like, you know, as like a Guatemalan American here or something in similar sense, you know, or reminds me of my friends. Like I know how they grew up, like it gives me, so I like their writing because it's closer to my actual life. And to see them do it in a way that is empathetic and like whole is really good. I mean, Guillermo, I've always loved Guillermo del Toro because like he's just a funny kid. He just looks like a funny kid, and like he just looks like the kid you could shoot the shit with. And I call him a kid, but he's like older than all of us. But you can tell he just loves what he does. And he just has like a little kid love passion for writing and for exploring. And I think that's something to always remember importantly to do that, because this is fun. We are making movies. Like, let's not act big-headed here. Like, this is cool, you know, we get to do make-believe every day. And I think that's fun to appreciate from a little kid standpoint, like he does. So
where can people find you, follow you on social media?
So I am pretty much everywhere. Like you can find me on Instagram by just typing in my whole name, Verner Maldonado. And I'm on Twitter, same way, Verner Maldonado. And I have my website too, which has my email. You know, anyone who ever wants to reach out, I more than welcome them. You know, that's why I have it out there so easily accessible, because that's how that kid found me. He just pulled my email somewhere. But I welcome it because I always remember what that was like, not knowing who to turn to about what to do, because there is no map. And even though there's still no map, I can at least tell you what I did and why that worked for me. And maybe that can work for you too. Or maybe you can understand the hustle, like we said, in like pushing to ask for something or knowing when not to ask for something, you know?
So I like to end the podcast by having my guests help me title the episode. So the prompt is a blank Latinx writer. And in that blank, you can put more than one word. You can mix them all around. Just whatever feels true to you, this conversation, the type of writer you are. I also use it as a way to like connect people. So if someone sees your title, they'll be like, oh, that's like me. Like, let me check this out. Let me like build community. The over-analytically chill Latinx person. You know? I love it. And with that, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was such a fun